Finland and the leaders of the country have formally announced their intention to join NATO. The decision marks a monumental shift from a long-held position of military non-alignment. DW's Yuri Reshetto reports on the dramatic turn.
Will Russia and Putin truly be crushed when Finland succeeds in joining NATO? The leaders of Finland have confirmed that they intend to join NATO, with this move signifying a historic Nordic policy shift that is clearly triggered by Russia's ongoing invasion of Ukraine and having the capability to redraw Europe's security map. Sweden is likewise planning a similar move. This move by both countries would mark the abandonment of decades of their military non-alignment in Europe. Only 3 months into Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine, the geopolitical ripple effects are already being felt across the European continent. Finnish NATO accession would clearly boost the capabilities and defensibility of the alliance and is an open rebuff of Vladimir Putin, who has bristled over NATO's post-Cold War expansion, which he used as a pretext for his Ukraine incursion. But what really are the short-term implications of this impending expansion by NATO, specifically for the war in Ukraine? What are the likely long-term consequences of this daring move by Finland as well? Could it prolong the war or compel Putin to take desperate measures, like deploying nuclear weapons? A move which could result in a full-blown war across Europe, and which is likely Putin's intent. What we bring you in this video would definitely leave you awestruck, so keep up! Just before we get into today's intriguing story, do make sure to like this video, hit the subscribe button and smash that notification bell to receive notifications of when we post more mind-blowing videos about one of the most influential and most feared men in the world right now. Do leave us a comment as well, we'd love to read your opinions on the subject. Now, let's dive in. Is the war on Ukraine beginning to backfire on Russia and its president Vladimir Putin? The decision by Finland to apply for NATO membership demonstrates unprecedented consequences for Putin in his war against Ukraine. While his immediate objective was to defeat and subjugate Ukraine and push NATO back from Russia's borders, the war so far seems to have achieved exactly the opposite. Now, Russia will have even more NATO presence on its borders, both through the addition of hundreds of miles of NATO territory to the Russian frontier and through the deployment of Western troops, with increasing presence in Central Europe. The war is clearly backfiring for Putin on two fronts, both militarily and geopolitically. Russia, in its reaction to the news, issued a statement which described Finland's move as a radical change in the country's foreign policy. To Russia, Finland's accession to NATO will cause serious damage to bilateral Russian-Finnish relations and the maintaining of stability and security in the northern European region. Russia has likewise gone on to declare that it had been forced to take retaliatory steps, both of a military and technical nature, in order to neutralize the threats to its national security that may arise from this. However, Moscow has not specified what steps it plans to take. Both the Finnish president and prime minister have jointly endorsed Finland's NATO bid and recommended the country must apply for it without delay to guarantee security amid Russia's military maneuvers in Ukraine and Europe's changed geopolitical and security landscape. A formal announcement from both leaders of Finland's intention to apply for membership has also been made, paving the way for a parliamentary vote that would endorse the move. It is expected to pass with overwhelming support. A formal membership application is also in the process of being submitted to NATO headquarters in Brussels, with this coming after US President Joe Biden held a joint call with the Finnish president during which he underscored his support for NATO's open door policy and for the right of Finland and Sweden to decide their own future, foreign policy and security arrangements. An immediate implication of this drastic move by Finland is that Putin will be forced to give military attention to Russia's northwest flank at a moment when he needs all the firepower he can muster for the conflict in Ukraine. And rather than prolonging the war, NATO's Nordic expansion could shorten it by increasing the military demands on Russia. Politically, it would also increase the pressure on Putin from within the Russian elite to alter course, since Finland's successful accession into NATO would further illustrate the cost implications of Putin's aggressive foreign policy, alongside the effects of sanctions and losses in the war itself. Finland's accession into NATO would result in drastic changes in her foreign policy, and this would negatively affect Russian-Finnish relations, which had been built in the spirit of good neighbourly partnership for many years, and which was mutually beneficial. Finland's security environment had changed starkly after Moscow's invasion of Ukraine, with the decision to join NATO being a clear affront and a blazing signal to Putin of Finland's unwillingness to continue to abide by Russia's demands on Finland to refrain from seeking membership of the 30-member Western military alliance. Finland shares an 830-mile, 1,340-kilometre border with Russia, the longest of any EU member. By joining NATO, Finland will seek to strengthen and guarantee its own security amid Russia's military maneuvers in Ukraine and Europe's changed geopolitical and security landscape. Putin's dilemma is that he has to respond in some way to Finland's NATO moves to avoid seeming weak, but his likely effective response options are well known and have been well envisaged and incorporated into Finland's accession plans. For years, Putin has threatened Finland that joining NATO would lead to negative consequences. So he can't afford to not respond in the same fashion now, given the bold and brazen move by the Finnish. The easiest response would now be to cut energy exports, as he has done before. But Finland can now easily diversify energy sources without excessively straining its economy. Militarily, Putin's usual response would be to send Russian conventional forces to the border with Finland and to deploy Russian planes and ships to the eastern Baltic. But this would be a very difficult option for him at the moment, as he needs all the military power he can get in Ukraine. Another retaliatory response that Putin may likely explore will be to deploy missiles to the border with Finland and to Kaliningrad. Russia possesses a large nuclear arsenal, including numerous low-yield or tactical nuclear weapons. Putin is likely to deploy such weapons in a way that plays to Finnish fears that entering NATO will trigger an aggressive Russian response. He is aware that there are strong pacifist traditions in Finland. In the past, stoking these dynamics by aggressive moves to create pressure on the Finnish government might have had its desired effect, but doing so now is only likely to increase Finnish support for NATO membership, given what they've seen happening in Ukraine. But this is exactly what war does. It creates fear, and fear leads peaceful nations like Finland to seek security through alliances. Finland has a serious defensive capability, including one of the largest artillery forces in Europe, and nationwide participation in the reserves like the Swiss or Israeli model. Their long border with Russia is dotted with thousands of lakes and is very defensible, as we saw almost a century ago in the 1930s Winter War. Finland's accession will round off NATO geographically and improve Europe's defensibility in a crisis. Finland will, however, need to step up her defense spending along with the rest of Europe, which practically wouldn't be much of a problem. Bringing Finland into NATO will significantly mitigate the alliance's biggest military vulnerability, which has always been the exposed geography of the Baltic states. Studying the map of Europe, it's easy to realize that the Baltic states form an exposed area in NATO's northeastern corner, and this has always made it hard and almost impossible to get reinforcements to them in a crisis. Adding Finland into NATO greatly removes this vulnerability and makes the Baltic states a much less inviting target. It would complicate the Russian long-standing practice of victory in the Baltic, which has been centered on grabbing a strip of territory in the region and then waiting for NATO to try to get enough troops to the region to evict them. Adding Finland and possibly Sweden to NATO makes the Baltics less isolated, more defensible, and easier to support in a crisis, which in turn would make Putin less likely to attack them in the first place, thereby completely eliminating the possibility of a war. Finland's membership in NATO is not a done deal yet, as any decision on enlargement requires the approval of all 30 members of the alliance and their parliaments. But as expected, there have been reactions from top Kremlin officials and Putin himself. Putin claimed that the move was in the interest of the US and vowed that Russia would react to the expansion of military infrastructure in Finland, although he insisted that Moscow had no problems with the country. Finland's president, Sauli Niinisto, on his own part, has stressed that Finland, despite its probable future NATO membership, would want to continue dealing with Russia bilaterally in practical issues generated by their border neighborhood, and hopes that Finland can continue to engage with Moscow in a professional manner. But would Putin and Russia be open to continue interacting with Finland in a similar manner? Well, we don't have to wait long to find out. A day after Finland's leaders announced their support for NATO membership, Russia's state-owned utility company InterRAO announced it would stop exporting electricity to Finland from Saturday, citing a lack of payment as a reason, although the move was widely seen as retaliatory. Finland gets about 10% of its electricity from Russia. With Finland's latest move to join NATO, the alliance should probably prepare itself for more provocations from Putin. Over the years, Russia has made repeated provocative incursions near or into NATO's allies' airspace, with these seeming to have increased in frequency in the last few years. This has so far played out well for Putin, as there's been no retaliation from NATO, given that it's largely a defensive alliance. In 2020, NATO's air forces across Europe were scrambled more than 400 times in an attempt to intercept unknown aircraft approaching the alliance's airspace. NATO has said Russian military aircraft often do not transmit a transponder code indicating their position and altitude, do not file a flight plan, nor do they communicate with air traffic controllers, thereby posing a potential risk to civilian airliners. Russia has long been very wary about NATO's existence, let alone its expansion, which it has long opposed. And this move by Finland that had seen NATO expand its territory is bound to cause a further rift between Russia and NATO and could result in a full-blown war based off how Putin reacts. Disclaimer, this is purely an informational video, and we're in no way promoting or approving Putin's recent action in any way.